need to wake up, and I don't suspect they're going to be going and asking governors for their permission in other states where they try to deploy the military on U.S. city streets.
Miles, could you keep going a bit with that, since you were Chief of Staff at Homeland Security during the first Trump administration? And can you talk about what when the protests started during Black Lives Matter, there was not an immediate coordinated response like what we saw yesterday. And when we have top officials immediately calling this an insurrection, we have the border czar on the ground in Los Angeles. What do you make of the decision to be in California, where Trump has threatened to cut off federal funding, instead of, say, Texas or Florida?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, I think the difference between these two periods of time is there are no more John Kellys. There are no more folks like me and Mark Esper and Rex Tillerson and you name it in an administration to convince the president not to go forward with this. I think he would have done something on a much more sweeping scale during the Black Lives Matter protests if there hadn't still been people behind the scenes like the Secretary of Defense saying we can't go as far as the president wants to. But I go back to I think this is a lot more significant than people are realizing. To have the United States military enforcing U.S. law is a giant, giant leap. And in the way the Trump administration looks to be going about it, we haven't seen anything like that in half a century. And I would suspect it ends up being unlike anything we've ever seen, perhaps since the American Civil War. Now, again, we're early. I'm just prognosticating here, but I'm telling you, this is what he wanted to do. And it was something that folks were very, very alarmed about because they didn't think the president was going to have the willingness or ability to check himself in terms of how to implement those authorities. He very much wanted his own private police force in the United States. This sounds crazy to say, but when I first came forward to talk about my fears about the Insurrection Act, I said the president referred to these as his, quote, magical powers. Those were his words and not my words, because Donald Trump came into the presidency and asked his lawyers, basically, what's the height of my power? Where can I really execute things where no one can second guess me? And he learned about the Insurrection Act very, very early in the presidency. And so with regularity, when he ran into an issue where he couldn't overcome it, or he was told the judges would stop him, or he couldn't enforce this or that law, he would bring it up and say, this is where I should use my magical powers, which of course seemed like very bizarre words for a president of the United States to be using. That's how he views these powers right now.
Joining us now, MSNBC political analyst Anthony Coley. He's the former director for the Office of Public Affairs at the Biden DOJ, and Max Boot, a senior fellow for national security studies at the Council on Foreign Relations and a columnist for the Washington Post. Thank you both for joining us as we work on this and think about and talk about this breaking news. Gavin Newsom tweeted out, the federal government is sowing chaos so they can have an excuse to escalate. We saw President Trump sign this memo yesterday invoking, I think it's Title 10. Max, talk about that. Is the president, do you agree with Governor Newsom, sowing chaos so they have an excuse to escalate?
Well, it sure seems like Governor Newsom is compelling in his analysis. I mean, if you kind of zoom out to the 20,000-foot view, I mean, what is provoking this confrontation in L.A.? It's the fact that the Trump administration is sending out these heavily armed federal agents in body armor and face masks, in many cases with assault weapons and tactical gear, to round up construction workers, to round up busboys, to round up hardworking immigrants, some of whom may be undocumented, but who are contributing to our economy and are, in many cases, paying sales taxes, paying Social Security taxes, essentially helping to make America great, to coin a phrase. And they, suddenly the Trump White House has imposed these quotas on ICE to go out, and they're demanding more and more roundups. And so it was kind of inevitable that you would see this kind of confrontation and pushback because they're now going to these workplaces and in heavily Latino working class communities like Paramount in Southern California. And so they're not shying away from the confrontation. They seem to be causing the confrontation, and you can just see that President Trump revels in the strongman image of, there's chaos in the streets, send out the troops. That is imagery that mobilizes his base and that accumulates even more power in the White House. So there's no question that the White House is provoking this, and it's a very, it's a very delicate and very inflammatory situation that could very easily spiral out of control.
Anthony, as we've mentioned many times, the border czar is in Los Angeles, and NBC's Jacob Soboroff had a chance to talk to him yesterday. Let's play a bit of their conversation and talk about it on the other side. Watch this.
What is the federal military mission in Los
This is not a
Angeles?
military mission. The president's bringing National Guard here to protect the public and protect officers. We have officers been attacked. We've had officers injured. So he's sending here as a force multiplier for law enforcement here, but not just to protect the law enforcement, to protect the general public. If Democratic leaders want to turn their back on public safety, they can. President Trump's not going to.
You said it's not a military mission, but isn't that what Title 10 is, or am I misunderstanding something?
They're here for a law enforcement mission to protect the public and protect law enforcement. That's what it is.
Anthony, you are the former DOJ official at the table.
Right.
Is the border czar correct?
Let me just say, for the record, this guy just so happens to be on the ground in Southern California at the moment, right? This is not a coincidence. This is carefully orchestrated. And what's striking to me is just these images, to Elisa's point, these images are bad. The rhetoric coming out of the Trump administration is bad, but neither the images or the rhetoric match what's really happening on the ground across the country. On this particular issue, 2,000 troops, there have been 12 arrests. Right? That is completely disproportionate. And Donald Trump says the reason he is cracking down on this entire issue in terms of immigration is because violent criminals, undocumented, illegal aliens are infiltrating American neighborhoods. The fact of the matter is that violent crime in this country is at record lows. That started, you mentioned, in the Biden administration. That started in the Biden administration. I was in the room with U.S. attorneys across the country when they were announcing their tailored programs, crime prevention programs, to bring down, to arrest the curve of violent crime. And we're seeing the benefits of that just up the street.
We're back with breaking news in L.A. California Governor Gavin Newsom just was out with his first reaction to today's chaos, clashes between protesters and law enforcement. Joining us now from L.A. is Jacob Soboroff, NBC News political and national correspondent who's been reporting on the protest in Los Angeles. Jacob, can you break down what was Governor Newsom's message right now?
Yeah, Elise, just to back up for a second, this is somewhat of a watershed moment here in California and across the country because, as you know, there are more undocumented people that live in Los Angeles County than any other county in the United States of America. President Trump has long promised, since I reported from the floor of the conventions, a mass deportation effort bigger than the size and scale of the historic 1954 one run by Dwight D. Eisenhower that deported 1 million Mexicans and some Mexican Americans after the Bracero program in the 1950s. And that is essentially the feeling on the ground here in Los Angeles over the course of the last 2 days. And with Tom Homan, the border czar for President Trump, out here in Los Angeles and saying that the National Guard would be deployed tonight, it has raised a lot of questions about the federal government's ability to do that, of course, to effectuate that, because the National Guard is under the control of the governor of the state of California. But the federal government evidently is insisting that under Title 10 of the United States Code, they are able to deputize these National Guard troops as on a federal military mission on the streets of Los Angeles tonight. Here's the statement from Governor Newsom, which we just received from his office. He says the federal government is moving to take over the California National Guard, and deploy 2,000 soldiers. That move is only purposefully inflammatory and will only escalate tensions. The governor goes on to say L.A. authorities are able to access law enforcement assistance at a moment's notice. We are in close coordination with the city and the county, and there is currently no unmet need. The Guard has been admirably serving L.A. throughout recovery, of course, referring to the wildfires that happened exactly 6 months ago today here in Los Angeles. This is the wrong mission and will erode public trust. And just to reiterate, I had spoken to the governor's office just moments before coming on the air. They had been in touch with the White House over the course of the last several days, coordinating, the governor's office says, on the response to these protests and obviously to coordinate on these federal immigration enforcement actions. I'm not saying to cooperate with them, but to have an understanding of what is happening on the ground here. The federal government says 118 people so far had been detained as of earlier today. Obviously, these actions, we've all been watching. With these actions, the numbers may go up. But the bottom line is, and I'd like to underscore, the governor of California is saying that the president of the United States is trying, against his wishes, to deploy his National Guard, the California National Guard, on a federal military mission on the streets of Los Angeles County tonight and Southern California in order to respond and participate in this large-scale immigration enforcement effort that is taking place throughout streets here in the Los Angeles area. And you're watching some of that on the left-hand side of your screen right now.
So, Jacob, to kind of drill down on that divide that is happening right now, it seems that you're going to have, just certainly based on the statements that have been made by both federal officials, including Tom Homan, who is calling for the deployment of the National Guard in L.A., as well as the statement that you just laid out for us with California Governor Gavin Newsom. How does this play out? Is there going to be a legal challenge as to whether or not the federal government can step in and make the claim that it is simply using the National Guard to enforce federal law? Because what's at stake here is the dispute as to whether or not, as Governor Newsom has laid out, the authorities, the local authorities, have the ability to continue to maintain law and order and security and safety for the residents of the Los Angeles area.
What the governor's office is telling me, Eamon, is that it's pretty clear in the Constitution the president has the authority to do this, whether the governor likes it or not. And you'll remember that at the very beginning of the administration, right on January 20th, one of the first executive orders, Executive Order 14167 on January 20th, was clarifying the military's role in protecting the territorial integrity of the United States. And in that early executive order and subsequent directives from the White House, including a military mission for sealing the southern border of the United States, a memoranda of April 11th, 2025, the White House made clear that they were considering and had at their disposal the option to use this Title X of the United States.
This is a prediction. That's why there are question marks, right? That's why I put question marks there. But I think this is the day where Hegseth is going to take the fall for whatever chaos Trump causes here. Because it's insane. Sending in the National Guard in this way is insane. It's absolutely a violation of people's First Amendment rights. The threat, his other officials are threatening that people are going to lose their lives. Generally, when you call in the National Guard in a context like this, it's usually in cooperation or at least the consent of the governor of the state, whereas you have here very clearly Governor Newsom is basically saying, and the mayor of the city, is that we don't want nor need the National Guard in this case, that the protests have been by and large peaceful, and that local law enforcement can handle this. All of this is just setting up Hegseth for failure. Because, and it's not even necessarily fully, because like Trump's ordering this, and you know he's going to have to either do what Trump wants or resign, right? And then when this goes bad, and when it's backlashes and people suffer and the civil rights are violated, and it very much feels like that, moment where Trump holds the Bible upside down, and that became a moment that really sunk his presidency, the first one. It was one of those moments where voters, realized that this choice was stark and they rejected him. Now, of course, unfortunately, they forgot that the next 4 years. But this is a moment where Hegseth will be made the fall guy. Because Donald won't take responsibility. Someone else will have to take responsibility for him.